Hello everyone, it's Friday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. A two-way street. This is how Washington's Secretary of State Antony Blinken described strengthened ties between North Korea and Russia. Such words came from a joint press conference after having talks with South Korea's top diplomat Park Jin, where they stressed the need to together intensify pressure on Moscow regarding its military technology transfer. Blinken visited South Korea after having stayed in Japan for G7 foreign ministerial meetings, and now he's in India, showing Washington's intense focus on the Indo-Pacific region. How did experts see Blinken's visit to Seoul, and what are the recent updates on North Korea? For this, we invited Doctor Go Myong-hyun, Senior Fellow from Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Welcome, Dr. Go.
Great to be here.
Thank you for being with us. And we also have Bruce Klingner, a Senior Research Fellow from the Heritage Foundation. Good to see you again, Mr. Klingner.
Well, thank you for having me again.
Thank you for being with us. All right, first question to our Dr. Go. So, like I said before, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Japan, South Korea, and now he's in India. And experts say that this demonstrates that the United States is quite focusing on Indo-Pacific region. Why is this?
Well, there's some concern right now that the United States' attention has been too divided. So there are already two wars going on. One in Ukraine, obviously, since 2022, and there's a new war that just broke out in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas. And so there's a concern, a growing concern in Washington and elsewhere that there could be a potentially another conflict zone opening up in Asia. We know that there's always a latent tension between China and the United States regarding Taiwan, as well as the South China Sea. And we know that China and the Philippines have been suffering from friction regarding the maritime borders in South China Sea. So that could escalate out of control and lead to some sort of a conflict. So there are all these concerns, and I think there are criticisms in Washington that the Biden administration has been focusing too much in Ukraine. We know that the Biden administration had to defend itself against growing domestic criticism against ever-increasing expenditure to assist Ukraine. So, for instance, the U.S. Congress, the House of Representatives, is very opposed to the idea of furthering assistance to Ukraine at the moment. So I think this is the reason why Secretary Blinken is doing the tour of the Asian countries and Asian allies to demonstrate that the U.S. commitment. But then at the same time, what really matters is not so much the war, so where it's visiting, but actually the capabilities of the United States military. And we know it's split. There are sizable number of U.S. deployment taking place right now in the Middle East, and these are far away from Asia. So this is a very precarious moment, I would say, for the United States and its allies.
Right, I see. So basically, Washington is trying to manage and control the situation in Asia as well. Right, I see. Now, Mr. Klingner, let's turn our eyes to Blinken's trip to Seoul. So it was his first under the Yoon administration. What significance does this have?
During the past 2 years, there have been extensive numbers of meetings between U.S. and South Korean officials, foreign affairs, defense, national security, et cetera, as well as trilateral meetings with Japan. So this is a continuation of that trend where the U.S. and Seoul are coordinating their policies, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. But also it comes at a time of great concern of the crisis in the Middle East, as well as the ongoing crisis with Ukraine. So the U.S. wants to coordinate with its very important ally, not only on Indo-Pacific issues, but also throughout the world. And that really reflects the importance that South Korea has, not only with the United States, but also on the global stage.
All right, I see your point. Now, delving a little bit deeper into what Blinken said during the talks with his counterpart Park Jin, he pointed out that Russia is providing technology and support for North Korea's military programs, and he reportedly discussed ways to intensify pressure on Moscow with South Korea. But how can it be done?
Well, clearly there are concerns that the Russians are paying North Korea with technology and other types of know-how and support in exchange for North Korea's assistance, especially with the artillery shells that Russia will probably use against Ukraine. We believe that the North Koreans have supplied up to 500,000 shells of the 152 millimeter caliber. And this could make a significant difference in the battlefield in Ukraine. And so, but that's for Ukraine, and for the Korean side, the concern is that Russia might be supplying some of the cutting edge technologies that North Korea might very much in need, for instance, to perfect its ballistic missile technology, as well as the military satellite technology. So, and then the Secretary Blinken has indicated that this exchange has already taken place. So it's really a matter of a willingness on the part of South Korea to work with the allies to put pressure on Russia. And in fact, South Korea has a huge leverage over Russia. Russia is in a very vulnerable state right now. It's very exposed in Ukraine. The war there is not going well. And then really, if South Korea could help Ukraine directly with military assistance, it could make a fundamental difference in the battleground. For instance, I just mentioned that North Korea might have supplied up to 500,000 shells of 152 millimeter caliber. South Korea, in fact, has in storage, it's a smaller caliber shell, but 2 million shells of 105 millimeters. So one can speculate that, South Korea also has in its possession a similar quantity of 155 millimeter caliber, which is quite similar to the one that North Korea supplied to the Russians. So if South Korea can just supply half of that, which will be 1 million, could really push back the Russians in Ukraine. So I think the Russians are very aware of this possibility that South Korea is basically an arsenal of democracy that the United States doesn't have right now. And if South Korea changes its mind about lending direct military assistance to Ukraine, it could make a fundamental difference and it really affect not just Russia's standing in the battleground, but also Putin's political standing domestically. So I think this is something that South Korea should definitely consider now that we are facing evidence of Russia having supplied key technologies to North Korea.
All right, interesting. Well, Mr. Klingner, the two top diplomats further highlighted the importance of China's constructive role against North Korea getting closer to Moscow, while saying it will not serve China's interests if their bilateral ties get stronger. But what do such words suggest?
Well, it's a bit of wishful thinking. China could play a constructive role in issues related to North Korea, but it has rarely done so. It has often been obstructionist, particularly in the last year or so, when it comes to the UN Security Council. In the past, it was willing to allow incrementally stronger UN resolutions in response to North Korean violations. But then it often turned a blind eye or actively engaged in violations of those UN resolutions. But the last year or so, particularly since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, both Moscow and Beijing have been even more obstructionist in the UN Security Council. So Seoul and Washington, as well as other nations, repeatedly implore Beijing to play a more constructive role to try to get North Korea in compliance with numerous UN resolutions. But it has not really been happening, particularly in the recent years.
Right, I see. So, Mr. Klingner, you think that China will again turn a blind eye, even if the relationship between North Korea and Russia strengthens even more, right?
Exactly.
All right, I see. Now, Dr. Go, this is last question on Blinken's visit to Seoul. And both sides agreed to step up extended deterrence measures against North Korea. And this actually comes after a report saying that the U.S. deployed more strategic assets than ever this year. What further measures could be implemented to step up this deterrence?
So yes, exactly. So the United States has already deployed the nuclear submarine. And then it actually deployed the B-52H strategic bomber, which is nuclear capable. And lately, the last event, action, was the test of the ICBM, the Minuteman III, which failed. But nonetheless, it's really about demonstrating U.S. assurance and the deterrence capabilities against North Korea and what else. But then this is actually forms these three types of military means, weapon systems. These are the so-called nuclear triad: the nuclear submarine, nuclear bomber, as well as the nuclear-tipped intercontinental ballistic missile. So in terms of weapon systems that the United States has in place right now, it has shown them all. So what else could be done at this juncture is more measures, such as, but more of a software rather than hardware. So we already have a framework for nuclear consultation group, the NCG, which is an assurance mechanism as well as a deterrence mechanism. And the two countries could add more flesh to this framework. For instance, the NCG, through the Ocean Declaration this year, both sides have agreed to conduct tabletop exercises. So even though tabletop exercises sounds like an exercise, in fact, could be very informative. It really depends on the level of details. So, for instance, the United States could share with South Korea more detailed scenarios on how the United States will respond with nuclear weapons in case of a North Korea's nuclear threat, or nuclear attack, sorry, not just threat, but nuclear attack, or no, not. And then South Korea could better prepare itself for such contingencies. And in addition, South Korea and the United States could conduct joint military exercises, just like the ones that we are having right now, such as the Ulchi Freedom Shield, but then add a nuclear component to it. So these are less visible measures, but in terms of substance, makes a fundamental difference in my view. So it's something that many of us experts have been expecting. For instance, Asan Institute, where I work, we recently released a report that outlines this kind of further assurance measures for South Korea that involves nuclear component. So I think there's a lot to be done, and then that can be done.
All right, I see. Well, Mr. Klingner, now turning our eyes to defense chiefs meeting. So defense chiefs of South Korea, U.S. and Japan could hold a meeting before next week's security consultative meeting, which will be the first standalone defense ministerial meeting between the three countries. And one of the main agenda items is reported to be over details of our real-time missile data sharing system. But what would this mean?
Well, it's part of a trend of improving not only bilateral defense cooperation between the U.S. and South Korea with the resumption of large-scale bilateral military exercises last year and then continuing throughout this year, but it's also the continuation of the improvement of trilateral security cooperation. We saw that the three countries resume their military exercises last year. Predominantly anti-submarine warfare and missile defense. And then late last year, the leaders of the three countries pledged to exchange in real time missile launch information from North Korea. It's a long overdue development, and one would have hoped that had been ongoing for some time. But and then when we saw with the Camp David summit that there was sort of a further pledge to implement that strategy, and in discussions with officials, it does seem like it's getting very close to implementation, if not already done so. It's in all of our benefit to have the best information on North Korean missile launch information so that the three nations can best implement their own missile defenses against not only short range, but also medium and intermediate range North Korean missiles.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Go, staying on trilateral cooperation, South Korea, U.S. and Japan agreed to launch a high-level cyber consultation group as a follow measure to an agreement which was reached during the Camp David summit. But why is it so important to block North Korea's cyber attacks? And what do you expect this group to do?
Well, for instance, South Korea and the United States have already agreed to upgrade the level of cybersecurity cooperation to one of similar to the conventional alliance that we have already. So it's called the Strategic Cybersecurity Cooperation Framework. So that promises to really intensify the level of cooperation, for instance, by conducting not just joint exercises, but also joint operations. So if Japan could be added to such a framework, then clearly there's going to be a lot of synergies. So we have to understand that North Korea doesn't really limit its attacks to South Korea only. It's pretty much the North Korea's reach is global. And Japan has a very similar cybersecurity postures like South Korea, which is in fact very defensive in nature. So the hope, I think, on the part of Washington is by linking South Korea cyber defenses with Japanese. The two sides could, in fact, have more synergy, obviously, but also have a more of a proactive stance against North Korea's cyber threats. So there's that aspect also, but also what you just mentioned about preventing North Korea's cyber theft. South Korea is one of the, even despite the, it's a sizable economy, but in proportion to its economic size, there's a disproportionate interest in cryptocurrencies. There are many cryptocurrency exchanges in South Korea, and in fact, the situation is very similar in Japan. So, Japanese cryptocurrency exchanges have been vulnerable to North Korean attacks. So I think there's that understanding too. And finally, I think when it comes to cryptocurrency exchanges and theft, the missing link here is in fact how the North Koreans can monetize the stolen cryptocurrencies. And the presence of sizable presence of Japanese Koreans in Japan who are friendly towards North Korea could constitute this link where North Korea could monetize their stolen cryptocurrencies into cash and then basically conduct money laundering in Japan and transfer the cash to North Korea. So for that reason alone, the Japan is a very important link or like a component in a regional cybersecurity defense system.
So that's how North Korea gets the money to, develop the weapons and all those systems, right?
That's what we suspect.
All right,
Yeah.
I see. Well, Mr. Klingner, let's also talk about the latest news in North Korea. So North Korea has designated November 18th as Missile Industry Day to commemorate the successful test launch of the regime's Hwasong-17 ICBM last year. What is intended by such a designation, and is this the first time Pyongyang has done something like this?
I believe so. They didn't do so back in 2017 when North Korea launched its first ICBMs, the Hwasong 14 and 15. So here they're really affirming the importance of the ICBMs to North Korea's deterrence and defense strategy. And it also gives us another anniversary to be on the lookout for more missile launches. So in the last year or so, North Korea has really highlighted the ICBMs. It issued a new nuclear law a year ago where it lowered the threshold for its use of nuclear weapons, including on ICBMs. And then this year, it codified that law in a revision to its constitution. So many of us are expecting or will be looking for another attempted launch of North Korea's military reconnaissance satellite. They've tried twice and it failed, and perhaps they'll try again on November 18th. Or there may be another launch of a ICBM, whether it's the Hwasong 17 or the 18, which is a solid fuel ICBM. So it certainly is affirming the importance of nuclear weapons and missiles, and also perhaps will be an indicator of when they may do the next launch of a large missile, whether it's the reconnaissance satellite or another ICBM launch.
Right, I see. Dr. Go, what's your view on this? The Joint Chiefs of Staff also said that it is highly likely that North Korea would launch another military satellite, right?
Yeah, so, well, in fact, it's kind of delayed already. North Korea had announced that they would, in fact, carry out this third launch attempt of their space vehicle with the military reconnaissance satellite last month in October. So launching it in November makes sense. So it gives more time to North Korean technicians to perfect the launch, the odds of a successful launch, and if maybe they can really iron out any last-minute wrinkles in their in the process of launching the space vehicle. So and also there could be additional help from Russia. We suspect that Russians are not going to send their personnel, scientists or technicians to help North Koreans because to be civil and too provocative. But then it could be happening. So all these elements combined indicate that the North Koreans' odds of a successful launch is probably higher than the last two times. But also the adage says the third time is a charm. So maybe North Koreans are betting on that too.
All right, I see your point, Dr. Go. Well, Mr. Klingner, meanwhile, North Korea shut down several diplomatic missions, including its embassies in Spain, Italy, and some countries on the African continent. And some say this is due to economic difficulties and that there could be further shutdowns. What is your view on this?
It's really a puzzling development. It would seem counterproductive for North Korea to shut these embassies. And it only has, I believe, 50 overseas, and so cutting 5 is a very large percentage of those. So closing the embassies, it constrains North Korea's ability to get its side of the story out or its messaging. And also the embassies have served as a base for illicit activities. But we also know that in the past, for really a long period of time, the embassies have had to be self-sufficient in their funding. They've had to generate funding for their own operations, and they often used illicit activities to fund that. So if the embassies are closing, it could show that not only were they not able to generate funding for their own operations, but that it does show that the North Korean economy is perhaps even worse than we've assessed. And so we may see this to be a going trend that other embassies will close. It could also be a reflection of international efforts to combat North Korean illicit activities, not only cyber activity, but other illicit activities. So it's certainly, I think, a reflection of North Korea's poor economic status right now.
All right, I see your point. But Dr. Go, the National Intelligence Service said that there have been signs of North Korea pushing for a new consulate. And many say it could perhaps be established in a country that is Russia-friendly. What's your view on this?
So probably likely. So I mean, really, I think where North Korea is going to establish a new diplomatic site is going to be very interesting. I think it's going to prove or disprove all these theories that we have to explain why North Korea is doing this. Just like many has pointed out, it's not so productive for North Korea to cut down on their diplomatic presence in the third world, especially when it has a long history behind it. And in fact, North Korea have been pretty successful in, help, especially in the third world countries, to raise its public profile. North Korea has, in fact, has a more active diplomatic presence in those countries. So in that sense, cutting down on their diplomatic presence in those countries, overall in the long run, it could be counterproductive. But if North Korea is considering the idea of opening up a new diplomatic site in a Russian-friendly territory or country, it could be an indication that North Koreans are essentially trying to focus their diplomatic efforts in countries that matter to them strategically rather than in diplomatic terms or politically, strategically or economically. So if that's indeed the case, then I think North Korea is showing that it's really following their own statements about North Korea being one of the three axes, Russia, China, and North Korea that form this authoritarian bloc. So I think it's very, very probable, and then if that's indeed the case, North Korea might establish a new diplomatic site in, say, in Central Asian countries that are friendly to Russia, and also presents a lot of economic opportunities.
All right, I see your point, Dr. Go. Well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Dr. Go, as usual, thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And Mr. Klingner, thank you for your time and insights as well. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be next Monday with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the weekend, and goodbye.